Gladiator II just came out. So the IMDb plot summary. After his home is conquered by the tyrannical emperors who now lead Rome, Lucius is forced to enter the Colosseum and must look to the past to find strength to return the glory of Rome to its people. Obviously, Ridley Scott directed, starring Paul Mescal, Denzel Washington, and Pedro Pascal. So we'll get into Gladiator. Spoiler alert, just for the episode. We'll talk about the first Gladiator movie in a little bit because it is we both put it on our list. But I'll just do a brief summary. I love the film. I watch it, at least once a year, sometimes twice a year. Actually, watched
Oh,
it twice
wow.
in the last week. So I watched it once before the new movie and then once after the new movie because I just love Gladiator. So those are my thoughts on the first Gladiator. We'll get into more of them. So I definitely was a movie though that I was not anticipating. Never thought this would get made. Obviously the first Gladiator ends with, spoiler alert, Maximus dying, so it doesn't leave much room for another story. But when I did see that he was coming back to this and saw Denzel Washington, being cast in the film, I was like, okay, this is cool. Like Ridley doing another Roman epic, which I'm a huge fan of sword and sandal movies. I love films set in the classical period. So I came into this with, a little bit of skepticism, but also anticipation. And at the end of the day, is it as good as the first Gladiator? No. Are there things in the film that definitely don't work? Yes, which I'll get into when we get into it more. But I really enjoyed this movie. I think the things that work outweigh the things that don't for me, and I thought it was a very interesting take that in the first film, it really is just a personal story of revenge and Maximus's journey. That's what grounds the movie. That's what you care about. And yes, there's sort of political statements and political machinations in the background about what is Rome and the Senate. And this movie flipped those two things, where the
Hmm.
politics was really the A story and the personal vendettas of the other characters were really the B stories, which I thought the B stories were not very interesting. Like I didn't really care about Paul Mescal's character very much or what he was kind of going through, and same thing with Pedro Pascal. But I really cared about Denzel Washington and the politics. So the fact that was the A story for me made the movie interesting and fun, and I got a lot out of it. And we'll talk more about that piece of it. But overall, solid film. What about you? What are your first thoughts after exiting the Coliseum of Gladiator 2?
Yeah, same as you. Like, I wasn't like waiting for this. I have not watched Gladiator as many times as you have. I probably had watched it once or twice, maybe, and then I watched it for in preparation for this podcast. So I wasn't waiting for the sequel, but there's something about knowing that Ridley's going back to that era is always exciting because nobody else can pull that off, as we've said.
No way.
And
Yeah.
then the cast is amazing. Like, obviously Denzel, but Paul Mescal, like I watched his TV show Normal People in 2020, and he's just absolutely amazing in it. And I've sort of followed his career since. Like
Mm.
whatever he does is really, really singular. Like we are living in this age of this new fresh talent, like Chalamet and Austin Butler and Barry Keoghan and all these new people. But I think Paul Mescal sort of has this really deep, sensitive, almost like a Dustin Hoffman like energy in the body and look of like Marlon Brando.
Mm.
So he's sort of that kind of classical actor, but with just like a lot of silent emotional depth to him. So for me, that was very interesting that, oh, he's going to be in this big sort of tentpole movie because he's been like an indie kind of actor so far, which didn't surprise me because I knew the moment I watched Normal People that this guy is going to explode and
Hmm.
is going to have a very interesting career. So all of that I was really looking forward to. And I agree. I think the movie is solid. Like I really had a great time watching it. Like you're not bored. Are
Hmm.
you entertained? Hell, you are, you know,
Right.
the
Yeah.
entire movie.
Right.
And you're right. Like I think it's the politics that takes center stage. I will say that I enjoyed the movie more when I was watching it as opposed to when I've more deeply thought about it
Oh,
because
interesting.
that's when the holes of the movie start to emerge. And I thought Paul was very good given what he was given. And this sort of goes back to what I was saying earlier is that I think Ridley's more interested in the process and politics, and the politicking is the process. And you have Denzel, who's sort of the driver and the agent of that. And that's why that part, that performance, and that character are the most interesting. And not to take any credit away from Denzel, like he's obviously one of the greatest actors of this
Yeah.
generation, any generation. And it's
Hmm.
fun to see him take like a fun, juicy part like this and absolutely relish in it.
Oh, yeah.
But the part is also kind of in service of what Ridley is interested in versus the rest of the pieces he's not that interested in. And I'm not the one about historical inaccuracies, whatever. Who cares? Like, this is
Right.
a movie, like,
Yeah.
grow up. But I think what I do care about is that the characters' motivations and such like really land. And I think the core theme, spoiler alert, if you've not seen the movie, of Lucius, played by Paul Mescal, finding out that he's Maximus's son, his mother finding that out, and how that union happens, and how this pain is sort of driving him for kind of bringing back Marcus Aurelius as his grandfather's dream. Like all of that, it's said out loud to us, but it's not deeply felt. And it's not the fault of Paul Mescal as a performance. It's just not in the script, I think. There is one person who I will put the blame on, in addition to Ridley, is Connie Nielsen. I think
Hmm.
she's perfectly fine as an actress, but I think the emotional center of the movie, apart from all the politicking, is her and this relationship that, oh, she let her son go away, he's come back, and what happens from there on out, and how the son who was against the Roman Empire and wanting to attack the Roman Empire now has to kind of flip because of his love for her mother, who he just found out, and the fact that he is the grandfather of Marcus Aurelius. Like there's a lot of emotional sort of pain in that as a center, which Connie Nielsen has to convey, and that just doesn't land at
Hmm.
all. And those beats are kind of skipped really fast. That, oh, we are son now. Oh, we are together now. Oh, this is happening. And again, I don't even care about the story. It's if it was just conveyed in the performance, and if Ridley had just given a little bit more breath to it, it would have kind of landed, I think. Having said that, I think it was fun to see the gladiator, in this case, Paul Mescal, being the underdog. He's bitter. He's kind of cocky, but making fun of all of Rome and all of that. His physicality is great. Like you really see how like kind of grungy and dirty and burnt up and all of that is really communicated. It's just that the crescendo of him kind of rising to being this, chapter of hope for Rome and uniting everybody, that just doesn't fully land. And I don't think it's his fault. It's just we don't get there. Ridley does just is not really interested in that, which is a bit of a bummer. I'm curious how you felt about that.
No, I agree with you, except I do kind of put it on Mescal. I mean, I've never seen him in a movie before or
Mm,
anything. This is my first introduction to him. I know that he's
mm,
very big on Twitter, not like as a tweeter, but people are like, falling over this
right.
guy. So I'm like, okay, let's see what he have. And I don't blame him in the sense of I think he didn't do a bad job. I just think he doesn't have the gravitas to pull off what this movie needs because there isn't much there with the story. And we'll talk about Gladiator when we get to it, but that was like is I think one of the best examples of a movie where the stars align for someone to turn into a global superstar with one performance, and Russell Crowe delivers that because he is just has the gravitas of that. And I found Paul Mescal to be a weak link in this movie where he just didn't pop for me. And a lot of it, I think you're right, is the storyline's not really
It's
that
a
interesting.
story.
But
Yeah.
an actor of more star power, I think could have still carried at least my attention. Because again, I didn't know who this guy was. And I'll also say kind of the same thing a little bit for Pedro Pascal, who I know also is an actor who's really worshipped a lot. I think he's fine as an actor. I'm not like worshiping him at the feet of him like a lot of
No.
other people do. I know he has a big moment, and he also did a better job, but still I felt like the wattage really wasn't there on these two leads. And maybe that's another reason why I just gravitated towards the Denzel stuff because he is just killing it. And I found
Yeah.
that part of the movie a lot more interesting. And I think to your point, that was really clearly found more interesting because that was what got
Yeah.
the better actors. I don't think they got more screen time, but just more like more excitement was going on when it came to like,
Exactly.
okay, how is Denzel, who is this character kind of in the shadows, plotting to basically take over Rome, overthrow the two emperors there, create the chaos and the conditions that are necessary for a coup, essentially, is what he's doing. And you can see it in just the way that he watches, the subtlety of how he moves through the room, who he's talking to, just his stares, which is, he's so good at that anyway. But the
Yeah.
way that he's looking at each of the characters and deciding, okay, well, I can use this person. This person can be my instrument, like he says in one scene with Paul Mescal, and that part of the movie really works. Honestly, it was kind of like you strip out the other storylines about Lucius and trying to connect it back to the first movie. I think the movie would have been really amazing if it was
I'm with you.
just
Just
like
make it
how
about the
Denzel.
political machinations.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it feels forced. And Even with Pedro, like he's not given anything to do. He barely even has anything to say in those coup scenes with the
Right.
Senate people. Like
Hmm.
he's not given a line. He's just looking,
Right.
So I don't know. I blame it on Ridley and the script. Like they didn't give these guys much to do. But
Hmm.
despite that, the fact that at least Paul comes through in his sort of simmering anger and rage. It's a different kind of rage. Like I've
Hmm.
seen people communicate, oh, where's the rage? I don't see the rage. I'm like, rage doesn't just mean yelling all the time. You can
Right.
see
Right.
this person is like burnt and hurt. I think
Hmm.
that comes across really well. All the physical arm to arm kind of combat scenes, like the one
Yes.
with the Twin Kings in the first introduction, absolutely amazing. Like you really
Yes.
believe that this guy has that power. It's just that it's just not allowed to go to a different level when he's kind of uniting everybody, and that's, I think, because of the story and also how it's filmed, right? Like I was comparing it again, one shouldn't, but you can't help it. But Russell's Gladiator speeches, the way they're shot, the camera is on him.
Hmm.
He's center stage versus here, they are wide shots. You hear Paul, but you don't really see his how he's kind of really summoning everybody's attention and love and respect and all of
Right.
that. So they're not shot the same way. And then I guess we have to talk about all the special effectry and such. Like all the practical sets are obviously amazing. Like he literally built Rome, it seems
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
But as good as the CGI stuff is as compared to what we've been seeing lately in like tentpole movies, it's definitely better. But you're still very aware of all of that. And I think in the moment it's kind of fun, I suppose. But it is distracting. The
Oh,
you
you
know
felt the
the
CG was distracting?
Yeah, the
Oh.
baboons, the rhinos, the sharks, like it's a bit much, I again to your point, I would have maybe cut out one of those things. Like there's enough going on as a spectacle anyway with all these people, and you build a coliseum and everything. I don't think you need so much of this. It's distracting in my mind.
Yeah, well, what I think they were doing, especially after watching Gladiator before and after this movie, in terms of
Yeah.
the depiction of Rome, I felt was really interesting. So in the first movie, they talk, Rome is sort of this majestic, very amazing sort of musical cues when they show Rome, and it's this idyllic place. And okay, there's this one
Right.
bad actor of Commodus, but Rome is amazing. And in this movie, Rome is shown as a like opulent, kind of falling apart metropolis. There's scenes of
Right.
homeless people everywhere. You see
Right.
people in the crowds holding up flowers and incense to their noses, which they used to do back then because the city stank. There was
Right.
no perfume or anything like that. So you saw people doing that. The rooms filled with incense. Obviously, the riots and things happen. And I think the opulence and the sort of over the topness of the Colosseum battles and the baboons and all these things just lead to a city that is so opulently corrupted that it needs to kind of be taken down. It's like Rome is actually the bad guy in this movie as opposed to something that just
Right.
has one bad person in there. It is, even the beginning, I was sitting there watching this movie in the beginning of the film, and there's a scene where Paul Mescal is defending his city in Africa from the invading Romans. And again, we'll talk about the Gladiator movie. There's a scene in Gladiator. The first one opens with the Romans attacking it's a
Right.
German tribe, and I'm like, yeah, Romans, I love in the first movie. Romans, I love you, amazing. One of my favorite moments in movie history is that opening battle sequence. And in this movie, like Rome is bad. They're shown
Yeah.
as like these invading forces, and it's just a very
Yep.
interesting flip between the two films in that sense. And I think that goes into this over the top opulence that they had. And obviously, the performances by the emperors are like Joaquin Phoenix's Commodus with no subtlety. It's like, let's remove all the subtlety.
I love them actually.
I
They're
love them
pretty
too.
fun.
I'm not at all saying that as a knock, but it's like he's
Yeah.
dialing all these things up. So to me, this the
Yeah.
ridiculousness of, I mean, sharks in the Coliseum obviously was not real, but I don't care.
No, I
I mean, it's
get
like the
that.
symbol
It
of
just
that, you
doesn't
know?
look good,
Oh,
is what
okay,
I'm
okay,
saying.
okay. The quality of the effects. Okay.
It
Yep.
doesn't look good.
For some reason, for me, it worked. And even the first movie, I remember got a lot of criticism at times, like bad CGI. And at the time, I don't remember it being that way. And to me, it still holds up. So maybe for some reason, through the Ridley lens, like I'm more forgiving.
I don't know. To me, the hair, I understand why they were doing it to your point,
Hmm.
but it just felt a little distracting because they just didn't look super good. I preferred the more hand-to-hand combat stuff because
Yes.
that felt just so tactile, so real,
Different
and
than the first one too,
different
which I
too.
which I
Yeah,
loved. Like it felt more like a brawl than,
yeah,
Russell Crowe's character is obviously a soldier, so he's very
yeah.
well trained. And Mescal, I mean, he's a soldier too, kind of, but not in like the Roman army. It
No,
seemed like he's more of like just the warrior because he's so angry,
He's a
right? Even
brute.
when he and
Yeah,
as a brute, right? And I liked those scenes a lot, like you mentioned. And just one more thing, most disappointing thing to me actually was the score. I
I
felt
know.
just again coming after Gladiator, which I think is one of the
It's
best movie scores of all time.
non-existent.
The only moments that I remembered were when they would do the cues to the old Gladiator theme, and
Right.
those I remember, but I definitely felt the score was lacking and probably the most disappointing parts of the film. But like I said, overall, I was in a way kind of
Yeah,
pleasantly surprised in following Gladiator that it wasn't a total disaster. I actually do want to see it a second time in theaters, which is rare
I
for me
would
this year.
too.
Right now, it's in his top 10 Ridley Scott films for me. I put it at the bottom half of the top 10, but still right in there.
Yeah, I definitely recommend it. I will say of all the stuff that he's been doing the last like 10 years or so, I think this one comes together at that scale the most, maybe barring one exception, The Last Duel, which
Mm.
is just brutal. And it's the process movies of all process movies because you're literally seeing the same story from so many angles. And
Yeah.
that's really why my theory clicked in because, like, oh,
Mm.
this works because it's in the design of the movie. But yeah, the same flaws are here too. People are in different movies.
Hmm.
All of that stuff is sort of not coming together. So, but I still highly recommend it. I think everybody should see the movie, and it's fun to kind of connect it with the old one.
I definitely think so too.
Like it's a true sequel. I've been hearing like, oh, it's the same story redrudged. I don't think so. I think like this conversation has proven there's a lot more meat on the bone. He's flipped the script in many ways. I think it's pretty interesting, I would say. In fact, like you said, and like we both said, like if it were more about just the politicking, it would even be a more daring, or this is not my take. Like I heard this on a podcast. Like, what if Lucius, who turns and becomes kind of a quote unquote sort of good guy who's after like valor and all of that, what if he was just brutish and selfish and just wanted to decimate Rome through the entire thing
No,
and
like a bad
gets
guy in a way.
like a bad guy and really becomes Denzel Washington character's like right hand person, and maybe they become victorious together, or
Hmm.
they sort of become so power hungry that they have to kind of take each other down at the end because there's only room for one. Like there's so
Oh,
many
that's interesting.
ways to do this. Like
Yeah,
it
yeah.
it didn't have to be about strength and honor, to be honest, because that's Russell's motto. There's no, it sort of feels shoehorned in this story actually. I will say another thing I should have mentioned up top, which is that Ridley loves a head chop. He,
Yeah,
he loves a head chop. Every movie has a head chop, pretty much.
yeah, great violence in this movie. I thought even dialed up from the first movie. I really
Oh
enjoyed
yeah.
the violence, especially to Denzel at the end. That hand-to-hand
Oh,
fight when he gets his arm cut off is just amazing. Just
it's
awesome.
chop, chop, chop all the way.
Hi there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I review a new release and then discuss 6 other movies made by that film's actor or director and how they shaped us. Subscribe right now or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.